The ice cracked beneath my boots like gunfire, each step a gamble I couldn't afford to lose. February in Alaska wasn't meant for the living. It was a graveyard of white silence, where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. But I was here, trudging through knee-deep snow along the frozen edge of Clearwater Lake, because someone had to check the northern traps before the thaw made them inaccessible. That someone was always me. My name is Emma Thorne, and I've been invisible my entire life. Not literally, of course. I existed. I took up space. But in a town like Coldridge, population 200 and dwindling, being the orphaned daughter of a woman who'd run off with a traveling salesman and a father who'd drunk himself to death, meant I was less a person and more a cautionary tale, the kind whispered about in the general store. Poor thing. No family. Works herself to the bone at that old cabin. Probably won't last another winter. They weren't entirely wrong. I pulled my scarf tighter against my face, my breath forming small clouds that disappeared almost instantly. The cold here wasn't just physical. It lived in your bones, settled into your marrow until you forgot what warmth felt like. I'd learned to make peace with it. Cold didn't judge. Cold didn't pity. Cold simply was. The lake stretched before me, a vast expanse of white broken only by the dark silhouettes of pine trees rimming the shore. Beautiful and deadly. I'd seen 3 people fall through the ice in my 24 years here. Only one had been pulled out alive, and even then, he'd lost both feet to frostbite. Nature didn't negotiate in places like this. I was maybe half a mile from the main trail when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a desperate guttural whine that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. The traps were still another mile north. This was something else. The whining came again, sharper now, edged with panic. I shouldn't have investigated. Every survival instinct I'd honed over years of solitary living screamed at me to turn around, to stick to the plan, to not deviate from the safe path. But there was something in that sound, something that bypassed logic and spoke directly to a part of me I couldn't name, the part that remembered what it felt like to be desperate and alone. I changed direction, moving toward the sound. The lake's edge curved inward here, forming a small inlet where the ice was thinner. I knew this spot. In summer, it was a swimming hole where the town kids sometimes came. In winter, it was a death trap. The current beneath kept the ice from forming properly, creating weak spots that could swallow a person whole. Or apparently, wolves. I saw them before I fully processed what I was seeing. Dark shapes struggling in the water, their movements growing weaker with each passing second. The ice around them had given way, creating a jagged hole maybe 15 feet across. Some were trying to climb out, their claws scraping uselessly against the slick surface. Others were just trying to keep their heads above water. 12 of them. I counted twice to be sure, 12 wolves, and they were dying. My first thought was absurdly practical. This is how you die, Emma, trying to save predators that would eat you without a second thought. My second thought was, I can't just watch them drown. I'd seen wolves before. Everyone in Coldridge had. They kept their distance mostly, ghosting through the tree line, their eyes reflecting campfire light on dark nights. Dangerous, yes, but also magnificent. Necessary. Part of the balance that kept this harsh ecosystem functioning. These wolves looked different somehow, larger. Their fur was darker, almost black in places, with markings I didn't recognize. And the way they moved, even in distress, there was something almost coordinated about their struggle, like they were working together rather than panicking individually. The smallest one went under as I watched, just slipped beneath the surface without a sound. I was moving before I'd made a conscious decision. There was a fallen tree nearby, half buried in snow. I grabbed one end and dragged it toward the hole, my muscles screaming in protest. The tree wasn't ideal, too short, too light, but it was all I had. I positioned it as close to the edge as I dared, testing the ice with each step. It groaned beneath me, a sound like the world itself was in pain. "Come on," I heard myself say, as if they could understand. "Come on, work with me." I lay flat on my stomach, distributing my weight, and extended the tree toward the nearest wolf. It was a gray female, smaller than the others, her eyes wild with terror. She saw the tree, seemed to understand, and lunged for it, Her weight dragged it down, nearly pulling me with it, but I held on. She scrambled, found purchase, and I hauled backward with everything I had. She came out of the water like a drowned ghost, collapsing on the ice beside me. For one horrible moment, I thought she might attack, her lips pulled back from her teeth, and I could see every sharp point. But she just looked at me, panting, and then stumbled toward solid ground. 11 more to go. I'd like to say the next hour was heroic, that I felt brave and strong and capable. The truth was messier. I was terrified. Each wolf that came out of the water could have ended me. Their teeth were inches from my face, their desperation making them unpredictable. But something kept them from turning on me. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something else. The fifth wolf, a massive male with a scar across his muzzle, actually nuzzled my hand as I dragged him out. The gesture was so unexpected, so strangely gentle, that I almost laughed, almost cried. In that moment, I wasn't the invisible girl from Coldridge. I was something more, something that mattered. The ice was getting weaker. I could feel it shifting beneath me. Hear the ominous creaking that meant I was running out of time. 9 wolves were out now, huddled together on the shore, watching me with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. The 10th wolf was smaller, younger, struggling hard. I got the tree to him, and he grabbed on, but halfway out, his grip slipped. He went under again, and this time he didn't come back up immediately. I didn't think, just plunged my arm into the water up to my shoulder, feeling blindly until my fingers found fur. I grabbed and pulled, and he came up gasping, his weight nearly dragging me in with him. We made it to solid ice together, both of us shaking violently. 11 down, 1 to go. The last wolf was still in the center of the hole, and he was the largest of all. Even exhausted and waterlogged, his size was staggering. He had to be over 200 pounds, with shoulders as broad as a bear's. His fur was almost pure black, marked with silver along his back and face, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were gold. Not amber, not brown. Gold. Like molten metal caught in the moment of transformation. And they were looking at me with an intelligence that didn't belong to any animal I'd ever encountered. He wasn't struggling like the others had. He was floating, conserving energy, watching me, waiting. The ice beneath me groaned again, more insistent this time. I was out of chances. If I went in now, I wasn't coming back out. "Your turn," I called to him, my voice hoarse. I extended the tree one final time. He didn't move immediately, just kept looking at me, and I had the strangest sensation that he was weighing something, making some kind of calculation. Then, with a power that seemed impossible given his condition, he surged forward. His weight hit the tree, and I felt the ice beneath me give way. Not all at once, just a subtle shift, a sinking feeling that meant I had seconds at most. I threw myself backward, pulling with everything I had left, screaming with the effort. He came out of the water in a rush of liquid and fur, his momentum carrying him forward. His paws found the ice, then solid ground, and suddenly all 12 wolves were safe. And I was sliding backward into the hole they'd left behind. The water hit me like a fist made of knives. Every nerve in my body screamed as the cold drove the air from my lungs. I tried to swim, but my clothes were dead weight, pulling me down. The current caught me, spinning me until I didn't know which way was up. This is it, I thought, strangely calm. This is how invisible girls disappear. Quietly, completely. Then something grabbed the back of my coat. The world lurched. I was being pulled upward, dragged through the water and then over the lip of the ice. I couldn't see who or what had me, could barely think through the cold. I just knew I was moving, being carried, my body completely limp. Warmth. Sudden and overwhelming. I was surrounded by bodies, furry, massive, pressed against me from all sides. The wolves. They'd surrounded me, their collective heat creating a cocoon against the deadly cold. I could feel breath on my face, hear the sound of panting, sense the weight of them shifting and adjusting to keep me covered, and closest of all, his head resting against my chest as if listening to my heartbeat, was the black wolf with golden eyes. I should have been afraid. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that I was surrounded by predators, that at any moment they could remember what I was and what they were. But all I felt was warmth and gratitude, and a strange sense of belonging I'd never experienced in my entire life. "Thank you," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to them or to whatever force in the universe had kept me alive. The black wolf lifted his head. Our eyes met, and I swear I saw something shift in that golden gaze. Recognition, maybe, or promise. His lips pulled back slightly, not in a snarl, but in something that looked almost like a smile. Then I heard them. Voices. Human voices calling my name through the trees. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the sound of snowmobiles cutting through the silence. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Every muscle felt locked in place, trembling so violently I couldn't control it. The wolves shifted around me, their warmth the only thing keeping hypothermia at bay. "Emma! Emma Thorne!" That was Jacob Miller's voice, the town's volunteer search and rescue coordinator. I'd gone to school with his daughter before she'd left for college and never came back. "Your truck's been at the trailhead for 3 hours. Emma." I opened my mouth to respond, but only a weak croak came out. The black wolf's ears pricked forward at the sound of the approaching humans. He looked at me again, that same intense, evaluating stare, and then did something I would replay in my mind 1,000 times afterward. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against mine, just for a moment. The gesture was so deliberate, so intimate, that it felt like a vow being made. Then he pulled back and released a howl, low and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body and echo off the mountains themselves. The other wolves answered, their voices joining his in a chorus that was both haunting and beautiful. Then, as one, they began to move away. Not running. Walking, almost reluctantly, constantly looking back. The black wolf was the last to leave, his golden eyes holding mine until he finally turned and melted into the tree line. They vanished like smoke, leaving only tracks in the snow to prove they'd been there at all. "Over here," I managed to call out, my voice barely above a whisper. By the inlet. The snowmobiles came roaring around the bend, and suddenly, I was surrounded by people. Jacob, his son Tyler, and old Martin Cross, who'd lived in Coldridge since before Alaska was a state. They descended on me with emergency blankets and chemical hand warmers, their faces tight with concern and confusion. "Jesus, Emma, what happened?" Jacob was checking my pulse, his hands rough but steady. "You're soaked through. Were you in the water?" "Wolves," I managed through chattering teeth. 12 of them fell through the ice. Had to get them out. The 3 men exchanged glances, the kind that said they thought hypothermia was making me delirious. "Let's get you warm first, talk later," Martin said gruffly, wrapping another blanket around my shoulders. "Tyler, radio Doc Morrison. Tell him we're bringing her in." The ride back to town was a blur. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body finally surrendering to the exhaustion and cold. When I was aware, I caught fragments of conversation, worried murmurs about my core temperature, debates about whether to take me to the clinic or straight to the hospital in Anchorage. Through it all, I kept seeing those golden eyes, feeling that forehead pressed against mine. Who were they? The question felt important, urgent, but I couldn't hold on to it. The darkness kept pulling me under. I woke up in Doc Morrison's clinic, surrounded by the antiseptic smell and the gentle beeping of medical equipment. Weak sunlight filtered through the blinds. Morning light, which meant I'd been out for hours. My body ached everywhere, a deep bone tiredness that came from pushing past every limit. Welcome back to the land of the living. Doc Morrison appeared at my bedside, his weathered face creasing into a relieved smile. He was 70 if he was a day, had delivered half the babies in Coldridge, and treated the other half for everything from frostbite to bear maulings. "You gave us quite a scare, young lady." "How long?" My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass. 16 hours. It's Tuesday afternoon. We had to warm you up slowly. You were at 92 degrees when they brought you in. He checked my pupils with a small flashlight. "You're damn lucky." Another 15 minutes out there and we'd be having a very different conversation. The memories came flooding back. The wolves, the water, the desperate rescue. The wolves, I said urgently, trying to sit up. Did anyone see them? The tracks? Doc Morrison's expression shifted to something uncomfortable. Emma, there were no wolves. What? Jacob and Martin went back this morning to document the scene. There was evidence you'd been in the water. Yes. Your tree. The disturbed ice. But no wolf tracks. Not a single one. He paused. The only tracks they found were yours. I stared at him, my mind refusing to process what he was saying. That's impossible. There were 12 of them. I pulled every single one out. They surrounded me afterward, kept me warm. They were real. I'm sure it felt real, he said gently, using the tone people reserve for the mentally unstable. Hypothermia can cause vivid hallucinations. The mind does strange things when the body is under that kind of stress. I'm not crazy. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. No tracks? How could there be no tracks, unless the snowfall had covered them? But it had been clear yesterday, hadn't it? No one's saying you're crazy, Doc Morrison patted my hand. You experienced a trauma. The mind protected you the only way it knew how. It's actually quite common in extreme cold exposure cases. People report seeing all kinds of things. Deceased loved ones, angels, animals that speak to them. I wanted to argue, to insist. But exhaustion dragged at me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing. It would certainly be easier to believe than the alternative, that 12 massive wolves had vanished without a trace. Rest now, Doc Morrison said. I want to keep you another day for observation. Make sure there's no lasting damage. You're going to be sore for a while, but you should make a full recovery. He left, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, the weight of their bodies, the warmth of their breath, the intelligence in those golden eyes. It had felt so real. But reality didn't leave 12 wolves worth of evidence and then erase it overnight. They released me Wednesday morning with instructions to rest and a prescription for antibiotics to prevent pneumonia. Mrs. Chen from the general store had brought fresh clothes, and half the town had apparently called to check on me. The attention was overwhelming in a way I wasn't used to. I'd spent so long being invisible that suddenly being seen felt almost intrusive. I drove my battered pickup back to my cabin on the outskirts of town, grateful for the solitude. The cabin had been my father's before it was mine, a small, drafty structure that was more functional than comfortable. But it was paid for, and it was mine, and after 3 days of people hovering, I craved its isolation. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the usual mustiness of a closed-up space, but something else, something wild and organic, like pine and earth, and something indefinably animal. I stood in the doorway, my heart suddenly pounding, and scanned the main room. Everything looked normal. The wood stove sat cold and dark. My sparse furniture was exactly where I'd left it. The stack of library books on the table hadn't moved, but there, on the kitchen counter, was something that definitely hadn't been there before, a rabbit. Freshly killed, still warm, laid out neatly beside my coffee maker. I approached it slowly, my mind racing. This wasn't unusual in itself. Sometimes hunters left gifts for neighbors, especially for someone like me who everyone knew struggled, but something about this felt different. The placement was too deliberate, too careful. And there were no boot prints on my floor, no sign of forced entry, just the rabbit, and that wild scent that seemed to permeate everything. I was still staring at it when I heard the howl. It came from the tree line behind my cabin, clear and unmistakable, not the yipping of coyotes or the distant call of a lone wolf. This was close, purposeful, and achingly familiar. The same resonant tone I'd heard at the lake. I walked to the back window and looked out. He was there. The black wolf with golden eyes stood at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away. Even at that distance, I could see his size, his power, the silver markings along his back catching the afternoon light. He wasn't hiding or attempting to blend in. He was simply standing there, looking at my cabin, looking at me. Our eyes met through the glass, and I felt that same electric recognition I'd felt at the lake. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't my mind playing tricks. He was real. and he had come here deliberately. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he dipped his head once, an unmistakable nod of acknowledgement, and turned to disappear into the forest. I found myself pressing my hand against the cold window glass, watching the spot where he'd vanished. My fingers were shaking, but not from cold this time. "You were real," I whispered. "You're all real." The question was, why had there been no tracks? And more importantly, what were they? Over the next week, the gifts continued. A brace of ptarmigan on my porch, a section of honeycomb, incredibly rare this time of year, left on my doorstep. Once, a perfectly intact elk antler shed, valuable both as decoration and as a material for tool making. Each morning I'd wake to find something new, and each evening I'd catch glimpses of dark shapes moving through the trees around my property. They never came close enough for me to see them clearly, never made themselves vulnerable, but they were there, watching, and somehow I knew they were protecting me. The town, meanwhile, had settled on a narrative about my incident that I couldn't shake. Poor Emma, driven half mad by isolation, had fallen through the ice and hallucinated a rescue that never happened. People were kinder than usual, but it was the kindness reserved for the fragile and damaged. I saw it in their eyes when I went to the general store, heard it in the careful way they spoke to me. Only old Martin seemed uncertain. He cornered me outside the post office on Friday, his rheumy eyes sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. "That inlet where they found you," he said without preamble. "I've been hunting these woods for 60 years. Seen a lot of strange things." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "There are stories from before the town was established. The native peoples who lived here first, they had names for certain animals. Sacred names, said some creatures were more than they appeared." "What kind of creatures?" He shook his head. "Stories change over time, get embellished, but the core is always the same. Protectors who could walk in two worlds, who looked after the land and the people brave enough to respect it." He looked at me intently. "You're a good girl, Emma. Always have been. Quiet, but good. The kind who does what's right even when no one's watching." "Martin, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you should trust what you saw. Not what people tell you is possible." He patted my shoulder gruffly. "And maybe you should pay attention to your instincts. They've kept you alive this long." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the weak February sunlight, more confused than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. Martin's words kept circling through my mind, mixing with the memory of golden eyes and the weight of that black forehead pressed against mine. Around midnight, I gave up and made tea, sitting at my kitchen table and staring out the window at the moonlit snow. That's when I saw them. Not just one or two, but all 12. They emerged from the tree line like shadows given form, moving in a loose formation across the clearing behind my cabin. In the moonlight, their dark fur seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality, and I could see details I'd missed at the lake. The way they moved in perfect coordination, the intelligence in their eyes, the sheer size of them. The black wolf led them, massive and magnificent, his silver markings glowing in the pale light. They stopped in the center of the clearing, and one by one they sat, watching my cabin, watching me. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was Martin's words. Maybe it was the accumulated strangeness of the past week. Maybe it was simply that I was tired of being afraid, tired of doubting myself, tired of being invisible. I stood, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and walked outside. The cold hit immediately, but I barely felt it. I crossed the small porch and stood at the top of the steps, facing them across maybe 30 feet of snow. None of them moved. They just watched, waiting. "I know you're real," I said, my voice carrying in the still air. "I don't know what you are or why you're here, but I know I didn't imagine you." The black wolf stood. Even from this distance, his size was staggering. He was easily the largest wolf I'd ever seen or heard of. He took one step forward, then another, approaching slowly. The others remained where they were, still as statues. He stopped at the base of my porch steps, close enough that I could see the individual strands of silver in his dark fur, close enough to see the way his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. His golden eyes held mine, and I saw something in them that made my heart race. Not fear, but recognition. Like he knew me. like he'd always known me. "Thank you," I whispered, "for keeping me warm, for the gifts, for whatever this is." He made a sound, low and rumbling, that wasn't quite a growl. Then he moved up one step, another, until he was on the porch with me, close enough to touch. I should have run. Every survival instinct screamed at me to retreat, but I stayed frozen, barely breathing, as he approached until his massive head was inches from my chest. He pressed his forehead against my sternum, right over my heart, just as he had at the lake. And then, impossibly, I heard a voice. "You saved us. Now we're bound to you, and you to us." The voice wasn't audible. It was in my head, resonant and unmistakably male. I gasped, stumbling backward, and the connection broke. The black wolf stepped back, watching me with those intense golden eyes. "Did you just—" I couldn't finish the sentence. He dipped his head in that same deliberate nod I'd seen before. Then he turned and walked back down the steps, rejoining the others. They stood as one, and together, they melted back into the forest. I stood on my porch shaking, not from cold this time, but from the absolute certainty that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Whatever they were, we were connected now, and nothing in Coldridge would ever be the same. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice, deep, masculine, impossibly clear despite never having made a sound. "You saved us. Now we're bound to you, and you to us." The words played on repeat, their meaning both obvious and utterly incomprehensible. By dawn, I'd made coffee and worn a path in my cabin floor from pacing. The rational part of my brain insisted I'd experienced some kind of delayed hypothermia hallucination. The rest of me, the part that could still feel the weight of that forehead pressed against my chest, knew better. I needed answers. And in a town like Coldridge, there was only one place to find information about things people didn't talk about in polite company. The library sat on the corner of Main Street and Pine, a converted church that still had stained glass windows depicting scenes from the Bible. Ironic, considering what I was looking for. Sarah Chen ran it, Mrs. Chen's daughter who'd come back from college in Fairbanks to care for her aging mother. She was younger than me by a year, but had always seemed older, more worldly. With her city clothes and careful makeup, she looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across her face. "Emma, how are you feeling?" "Mom told me about the accident. I'm fine." I moved toward the back shelves, past the romance novels and cookbooks, toward the dusty section labeled Local History. "Sarah, do you have anything about the indigenous peoples who lived here before Coldridge was established?" Her eyebrows rose. "That's specific. School project? Personal interest?" She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "There's not much. Most of the oral histories were lost when the elders passed, but there are a few anthropology papers, some translated stories." She moved to a shelf and pulled down 3 thin volumes. The Athabascan tribes that lived in this region had rich spiritual traditions. A lot of it centered around animals as messengers or protectors. My heart beat faster. "What kind of animals?" "Bears, mostly. Ravens. Eagles." She paused, watching my reaction. "Wolves featured prominently in some of the northern tribes' stories. They were seen as complicated, dangerous but honorable. There were stories about shapeshifters, people who could walk in animal form." The room felt suddenly smaller. Shapeshifters. I know how it sounds. Sarah leaned against the desk, her expression carefully neutral. "But you have to understand, these weren't just fairy tales to them. These were part of their spiritual framework, their understanding of the world. Some tribes believed certain bloodlines carried the ability to transform, that it was a sacred gift meant to protect the balance between human settlements and the wild." I opened one of the books with shaking hands. The pages were yellowed, filled with academic language and footnoted references, but underneath the scholarly veneer, the stories were there. Accounts of warriors who became wolves, of alphas who led both human and animal packs, of bonds formed between protectors and those they deemed worthy. "Why are you asking about this, Emma?" Sarah's voice was gentle. "Does this have something to do with what happened at the lake?" I looked up at her, weighing how much to say. In her eyes I saw something unexpected. Not skepticism, but a kind of knowing, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask these questions. What if I told you I didn't hallucinate what I saw? What if the wolves were real, and they're still here? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached under the desk and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with age. My great-grandmother kept this. She was Dana Ina, married a Chinese immigrant who worked the gold mines. She wrote in English so her children could read it, but she never stopped believing in the old ways. She pushed the journal toward me. She wrote about them, the guardians. Said they came to Coldridge 60 years ago, drawn by something in the land. She said they looked like wolves but carried human souls. My hands trembled as I opened the journal. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. I flipped through pages of daily observations, recipes, family histories, until I found a section marked with a red ribbon. They are here again. I saw them in the forest beyond the Chen property, 12 strong, led by one whose eyes hold the weight of many lifetimes. They do not hunt our livestock or threaten our children. They watch. They protect. They wait. For what, I cannot say, but I know they serve a purpose beyond our understanding. To be chosen by them is to be marked for something greater than an ordinary life. The entry was dated March 1965. 60 years ago, just as Sarah had said. 12, I whispered. She wrote about 12. Sarah nodded slowly. She saw them multiple times over the years. Always 12. Always led by the one with golden eyes. She looked at me intently. Emma, I don't know exactly what happened to you at that lake, but I know my great-grandmother wasn't crazy, and I don't think you are either. If they chose to reveal themselves to you, to save you, there's a reason. I spent the next 3 hours in that library, reading everything Sarah could find. The academic papers were frustratingly vague, couched in anthropological language about belief systems and cultural narratives. But the older texts, the ones written by people who'd actually lived in these mountains, told a different story. They spoke of protectors who walked between worlds, of alpha leaders who carried the weight of their pack in both human and animal form, of bonds that transcended species, formed through acts of selflessness or courage. The details varied by tribe and region, but the core remained consistent. These weren't just wolves, they were something more, and apparently, I'd bound myself to them by pulling them from that frozen water. The next few days passed in a strange routine. I went to work at the equipment rental shop where I'd worked part-time for 3 years, sorting tools and handling paperwork for the logging crews. I bought groceries at the general store, nodded politely at neighbors who asked how I was feeling, and maintained the appearance of normalcy. But every evening, they came. Sometimes just a few, moving through the trees around my cabin. Sometimes all 12, sitting in the clearing like silent sentinels. And always, always the black wolf was there, watching, waiting, his golden eyes tracking my every movement through the windows. I started leaving my back door unlocked. I couldn't explain why, even to myself. It was foolish, dangerous even. But some instinct told me that whatever was happening, fighting it would only make things harder. They'd saved my life. They were protecting me. The least I could do was trust them enough to lower my defenses. On the 7th night after the library visit, I woke to find him in my cabin. The black wolf stood in my living room, massive and impossibly still, his dark form barely visible in the shadows. Moonlight streaming through the window caught his eyes, making them glow like twin flames. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't scream. Didn't reach for the rifle I kept above the door. I just sat up slowly, my blanket clutched to my chest. "You're inside," I said stupidly, my voice hoarse with sleep. He moved toward my bedroom doorway, each step deliberate and soundless. When he reached the threshold, he sat, facing me, waiting. I swung my legs out of bed, my bare feet finding the cold floor. I was wearing flannel pajamas and thick socks, my blonde hair falling loose around my shoulders. Every rational thought told me this was insane. There was a 200-pound wolf in my bedroom, and I was approaching him like he was a house pet. But I'd stopped listening to rational thoughts days ago. I crossed the room and knelt in front of him, bringing us nearly eye level. This close, I could see every detail. the silver guard hairs mixed into his black fur, the old scars hidden beneath his coat, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. He smelled like the forest, like pine and snow and something wildly alive. "Why me?" I whispered. "Of all the people in Coldridge, why did you let me see you? Why are you here?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air around him began to shimmer. I jerked backward, fear finally breaking through my strange calm. The wolf's form seemed to blur, darkness folding in on itself, bones shifting with sounds that shouldn't have been possible. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath coming in short gasps, unable to look away from the transformation happening in front of me. And then, where a wolf had been, a man knelt. He was naked. I registered that first, with a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the temperature, but it was his face that held my attention. Strong features, sharp cheekbones, a jaw covered in dark stubble. His hair was black, shot through with silver at the temples, falling just past his shoulders. And his eyes were still that impossible gold, burning with the same intelligence I'd seen in the wolf's gaze. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Ancient and powerful, and utterly inhuman despite his human form. "Emma Thorne," he said, and his voice was the same one I'd heard in my head, deep, resonant, with an accent I couldn't place. "You asked why. The answer is simple. Because you were brave enough to try. Because you saw 12 dying wolves, and your first instinct was to save us, not to run. Because in that moment, you proved yourself worthy." I couldn't form words, could barely breathe. He was real. All of it was real. "I am Cade Northwood," he continued. "Alpha of the Clearwater Pack. We've walked these mountains for longer than your town has existed, protecting the balance, keeping the wild places safe." He paused, his golden eyes never leaving mine. "We are lunar-touched, what your kind's old stories call shifters. We live between two worlds, human and wolf, belonging fully to neither. The journal," I managed. "Sarah's great-grandmother wrote about you, 60 years ago." A slight smile touched his lips. "Mei Chen was a wise woman. She understood what most humans refuse to see, that the world is larger and stranger than their limited beliefs allow." He shifted, settling into a more comfortable position, seemingly unconcerned by his nakedness. I forced myself to focus on his face, on the conversation, even as my mind reeled with the implications of everything I was seeing. "When we fell through that ice, we were in our animal forms," Cade said. "We'd been tracking a group of poachers who'd been decimating the elk population. We didn't realize how thin the ice had become until it was too late. In wolf form, we're powerful, but we're also vulnerable in ways humans aren't. The cold, the water, it was draining our strength faster than we could recover it. You would have died," I said quietly. "Yes, all of us. An entire pack, gone in a single afternoon." His expression darkened. "As Alpha, their deaths would have been my responsibility. My failure." I thought about that. About the weight of leading, of being responsible for 11 other lives. Of carrying that burden while the ice water pulled you under. But I found you. You found us, and you didn't hesitate. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity almost overwhelming. "Do you understand how rare that is, Emma? How many people would have walked away, or called for help that would arrive too late, or frozen in fear? You risked your life for creatures you had every reason to fear. You dove into water that nearly killed you to save the last of us." Heat crept up my neck. "You kept me warm afterward. You saved me too. A debt repaid. But the bond was already forming." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and took my hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused, his fingers strong enough to crush bone but gentle in their touch. "Among my kind, such an act creates a connection. You shed blood and sweat and risked death for my pack. By our oldest laws, that makes you one of us. Pack." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning I was only beginning to understand. "I'm human," I said weakly. "You're ours." His thumb brushed across my knuckles, the gesture both possessive and tender. "The question is whether you'll accept it. Whether you'll accept us." I looked down at our joined hands. His so much larger, marked with scars I couldn't begin to imagine the stories behind. Then I looked up at his face, at those extraordinary eyes that held centuries of wisdom and loneliness. What does accepting mean? It means you stop living at the edges of your own life. It means you claim the strength you've always had but never believed in. It means you become part of something larger than yourself. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. It means you let us protect you. And in return, you stand with us against whatever threatens the pack. It means you matter, Emma, not as an invisible girl in a dying town, but as one of us. Tears burned behind my eyes. He saw me. Truly saw me, in a way no one ever had. Not as poor Emma, the orphan who'd never amount to anything, but as someone worthy of protection, of belonging. "I'm not strong," I whispered. "I'm not brave. I'm just—" "You dove into frozen water to save the last wolf," he interrupted, his voice fierce. "After you'd already saved 11 others. After your body was past the point of exhaustion. You didn't think about yourself, didn't calculate odds or weigh risks. You just acted. That is the definition of bravery, Emma. That is strength." I wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened me. "The others," I said. "Your pack. Do they feel the same way?" A true smile crossed his face then, transforming his harsh features into something warmer. "They've been arguing about who gets to hunt for you. Riley, the gray female you pulled out first, wants to teach you how to track. Finn, the one with the scarred muzzle, thinks you need better protection and has been scouting your property boundaries every night. Even Ash, the youngest, who's usually afraid of humans, brings you gifts and whines when you don't acknowledge them." The image of 12 massive wolves arguing about my welfare was so absurd I almost laughed. Almost. "This is insane." "Yes," Kate agreed. "But no less real for its insanity." He stood in one fluid motion, pulling me gently to my feet. We were close now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his bare skin. "I'm not asking you to understand everything tonight. I'm only asking you to trust what you already know in your heart, that we are yours, and you are ours. The rest will come with time." He released my hand and stepped back. The air shimmered again, and in seconds, the wolf stood before me once more. He looked at me with those golden eyes, dipped his head in that familiar gesture, and padded silently out of my bedroom. I heard my back door open and close. Then silence. I sank onto my bed, my entire body shaking. Everything I'd believed about the world had just been shattered and remade. Wolves were men. Men were wolves. Magic was real. And somehow, impossibly, I was connected to it all, connected to him. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my racing heart. Tomorrow I would have questions. Tomorrow I would need to figure out what this all meant, what I was agreeing to, how my life would change. But tonight, I simply sat in the darkness and let myself feel the truth of what he'd said. I mattered. For the first time in my life, I mattered to someone, to 12 someones who could tear apart a bear but brought me honeycomb and ptarmigan. I laughed then, a slightly hysterical sound that turned into a sob, and then I cried. Not from fear or sadness, but from relief, from the overwhelming realization that I wasn't alone anymore. I'd never been truly alone before, not like this, but I'd never had anyone either, not really. Now I had a pack. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My boss, Tom Henderson, sounded more concerned than annoyed, probably still worried about my accident. I assured him I just needed a day to rest, hung up and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked different, not physically, same pale skin dusted with freckles, same blonde hair that never quite cooperated, same unremarkable features. But there was something in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a kind of awareness, maybe, or purpose. "You're losing it, Emma," I told my reflection. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, watching the tree line. The morning was crisp and clear, sunlight making the snow sparkle like diamonds. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the world hadn't tilted on its axis 12 hours ago. I was on my second cup when I saw movement at the forest edge. She emerged slowly, cautiously. the gray female Cade had called Riley. She was smaller than the others, her coat a beautiful mix of silver and charcoal. She stopped at the tree line, watching my cabin, and I realized she was waiting for some kind of permission. Before I could second-guess myself, I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The cold bit through my sweater immediately, but I ignored it. Riley's ears perked forward, her whole body tensing with anticipation. "It's okay," I called out. "You can come closer." She moved across the clearing in a lope that was both graceful and powerful. When she reached the porch, she sat, looking up at me with eyes the color of storm clouds. Then, just as Cade had done, she began to shift. I'd seen the transformation once, but it didn't make the second time any less remarkable. Fur receded, bones reshaped, and within seconds, a woman knelt where the wolf had been. She was lean and athletic, with short silver-gray hair and sharp, intelligent features. She looked to be in her 30s, though something about her eyes suggested she was far older. "Emma Thorne," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent, British maybe, or something close to it. "May I come inside? There's much we need to discuss, and I'd rather not freeze my arse off doing it." Despite everything, I laughed. There was something disarming about her directness, her casual profanity. "You're all naked when you shift," I said, then immediately felt my face heat. "That came out wrong. I just meant, do you need clothes?" Riley grinned. "Observant and thoughtful. I can see why Cade is so taken with you." She stood, completely unself-conscious. "Clothes would be lovely, actually. We usually stash them around the territory, but I came straight here this morning." I hurried inside and grabbed a pair of my largest sweatpants and a thermal shirt. They'd be tight on her. She was taller than me and more muscular, but they'd work. When I returned to the porch, she accepted them gratefully and dressed with efficient movements. "Better," she said, following me inside. "Now let's talk. Tea?" I found myself making tea for a werewolf. Shifter, I corrected mentally. In my kitchen, while she examined my cabin with frank curiosity. She picked up my library books, studied my sparse decorations, ran her fingers along the windowsill where I kept a small collection of interesting rocks I'd found hiking. "You live simply," she observed. "By choice or necessity?" "Necessity mostly. I poured hot water over tea bags. Working part-time at an equipment rental doesn't exactly make you rich, and Coldridge isn't known for its job opportunities. But you stay." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Where else would I go? This is home. It's all I've ever known. Riley accepted her mug and sat at my small table, gesturing for me to join her. "Cade told you about the bond, about what it means. Some of it, not all." I wrapped my hands around my own mug, grateful for the warmth. "He said I'm packed now, but I don't really understand what that means on a practical level." "It means you're family," Riley said simply. "It means we protect you, provide for you, stand beside you. It also means we expect the same in return." She sipped her tea, watching me over the rim. "Cade is Alpha. He's the leader, the decision-maker, the one who bears ultimate responsibility for the pack. But we all have our roles, our strengths. I'm tracker and scout. Finn is our fighter. Ash, the youngest, is still finding his place. We function as a unit, each piece essential to the whole. And what would my role be? That depends on what you want it to be." She set down her mug. "Emma, you need to understand something. What happened at that lake, pulling us out, saving us, that was extraordinary. But it was also the beginning, not the end. The bond has formed, yes, but bonds need nurturing. They need trust built over time, shared experiences, mutual respect." I thought about that. "You're saying I'm not really pack yet. Not fully. I'm saying you've been invited into something remarkable, but whether you truly become one of us depends on choices you make going forward." Her expression softened. "I'm also saying we want you. All of us. Not because we feel obligated, but because in that moment at the lake, you showed us who you are. And who you are is someone worth having at our backs." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly. "I don't know how to be part of a pack. I've been alone my whole life. Then it's time to learn." Riley leaned forward. "Let me teach you." Let Finn show you our territory. Let the others share their gifts with you. Let Cade—" She paused, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Let Cade do what alphas do." "Which is?" "Claim what's his." The
I looked
words
away,
sent heat flooding
flustered.
through me. "I barely know him." "You know him where it counts," Riley's voice gentled. "You knew him the moment you looked into his eyes at that lake. You recognized him, Emma, just as he recognized you. Don't overthink it. The bond doesn't lie." We talked for another hour. Riley explained their history, how the Clearwater Pack had formed 2 centuries ago, how they'd moved through different territories as human expansion pushed them farther into wild spaces, how they'd come to these mountains 6 decades ago and claimed them as their permanent home, how they'd watched Coldridge grow from a mining camp into a struggling town, protecting it from threats humans never knew existed. "We keep the balance," Riley explained. "We hunt the predators that would otherwise decimate livestock. We track poachers. We keep rogue shifters from establishing territory here. We're the reason this town has survived as long as it has, even if they don't know it. And now I know," I said quietly. "What happens to humans who learn about you?" Riley's expression turned serious. "Normally, we ensure they forget. There are ways, not pleasant, but necessary." She saw my expression and quickly added, "But you're different. You're bonded. The rules don't apply the same way. Though, Emma, you cannot tell others. The secret must remain secret, for our protection and theirs." I nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. "I won't tell anyone." "Good." She stood, stretching. "Now, how do you feel about a run?" "A run?" "In the forest. I'll stay in human form with you, teach you how to move quietly, how to read signs. It's a basic skill every pack member needs." She grinned at my hesitation. "Come on, Thorn. Time to start earning your place." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and rapid learning. True to her word, Riley taught me how to move through the forest, how to identify tracks and scat, how to read the subtle signs of animal presence. Finn, the scarred male who'd nuzzled my hand at the lake, showed me the pack's territory boundaries and explained their patrol patterns. Even Ash, shy and nervous, eventually warmed up enough to demonstrate how they marked territory and communicated across distances using specific howls. But it was Cade who remained the constant presence in my life. He came to me every evening, sometimes in wolf form, sometimes as a man. We'd sit on my porch or walk the perimeter of my property, and he'd tell me stories about the pack, about their history, about the challenges of leading a group of strong-willed predators. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised me, and a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his fierce exterior. I found myself watching for him, listening for his distinctive howl, feeling incomplete when he wasn't near. The bond, I realized, was growing stronger. What had started as gratitude and fascination was deepening into something more profound, something that felt dangerously close to love. "You're falling for him," Sarah said one afternoon at the library. I'd started visiting regularly, using research as an excuse to spend time with the one person in town I could almost talk to about what was happening. "I can see it on your face." I didn't deny it. "Is that what the bond does? Forces feelings?" "I don't think it forces anything." Sarah restacked books with practiced efficiency. "I think it opens doors that were already there, waiting. Cade Northwood, if that's even his real name, sounds like someone worth falling for." "He's not human, Sarah." "So?" She raised an eyebrow. "Half the men in this town are barely human in the ways that matter. At least your wolf man brings you food and treats you like you're precious." She had a point. That night, Cade arrived earlier than usual. He shifted on my porch, and I'd learned to keep a bag of his clothes by the back door. He dressed quickly. Jeans, a Henley, boots. And when he turned to face me, his expression was troubled. "There's a problem," he said without preamble. "Hunters. Not local. They're from outside, well-equipped and organized. They've been moving through the territory, setting traps and cameras. We've been monitoring them for 3 days." My stomach dropped. "Do they know about you?" "We don't think so. But they're getting close to areas we frequent. It's only a matter of time before they spot something that raises questions." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "We can't drive them out without revealing ourselves. Can't kill them without inviting investigation. We're stuck. An idea sparked in my mind. What if I help? He looked at me sharply. How? I'm local. I work with the logging crews, know most of the wilderness guides. If I hear about hunters in the area, it's natural for me to check it out. Locals are protective of the land, especially this time of year, when the snow makes rescue operations difficult. I warmed to the idea. I could find them, figure out what they're after, maybe even convince them to move on. Absolutely not. Cade's voice was flat. You're not putting yourself at risk. I'm already at risk, I countered. If they discover your pack, if something happens because they get too close, that affects me too. I'm part of this now, remember? Emma, you said the bond means we stand together. That works both ways, Cade. You can't protect me from everything while expecting me to just sit safely inside my cabin. We stared at each other, the tension thick between us. Finally, he exhaled roughly. You're going to be a nightmare to lead, aren't you? Probably, I admitted. But you chose me anyway. Something shifted in his expression. Heat replacing frustration. Yes, he said quietly. I did. He stepped closer. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that I could feel his warmth, smell pine and snow, and something uniquely him, my heart hammered against my ribs. Emma, he said, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate. Before you go rushing into danger to help us, I need you to understand something. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. You matter to this pack. You matter to me. Not just because of some mystical bond, but because you're you. Because you're brave and kind and stronger than you know. Because when I'm near you, I feel something I haven't felt in decades. Hope. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of his words settling into my bones. I'm going to kiss you now, he said. If you don't want that, tell me. But Emma, I've been wanting to do this since the moment you pulled me from that water. I should have been nervous, should have overthought it. Instead, I simply said, yes. He kissed me like I was precious and dangerous all at once, gentle but claiming, tender but possessive. His other hand came up to frame my face, holding me like I might disappear if he let go. I gripped his shirt, rising on my toes to get closer, and felt him growl softly against my mouth. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes had gone full gold, glowing in the dim light of my porch. Mine, he said roughly. My mate, my Emma. And despite everything, the insanity of the situation, the impossibility of it all, I knew it was true. I was his, and he was mine. We found the hunters 2 days later. I'd done exactly what I'd said. Asked around town, mentioned concern about out-of-state hunters who might not respect local customs, and tracked them to a camp about 8 miles northeast of my cabin. Cade had insisted on coming with me, though he stayed out of sight in wolf form while I approached their camp. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all in their 30s, with expensive gear and professional-grade cameras. Hello? I called out before entering their clearing, not wanting to startle anyone armed. My name's Emma Thorne. I'm from Coldridge, just checking in on hunters in the area. The woman stood, friendly but cautious. We're not hunting game, she said. We're wildlife photographers, documenting wolf populations for a conservation project. My blood ran cold. Wolves? There's been unusual activity in this region. The taller man joined us, showing me a tablet with photos. Large wolves, moving in coordinated groups. We're trying to get documentation. Maybe identify a new pack structure. I looked at the photos. They were blurry, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Members of Cade's pack, caught on camera. The locals don't like people bothering the wildlife, I said carefully. Especially not with all this equipment. It disturbs the natural patterns. We're being very careful, the woman assured me. Non-invasive observation only. But I could see in their eyes that they were excited. They'd found something unusual, something that could make their careers, and they weren't going to leave until they had their documentation. I chatted with them for a few more minutes, got their names. Dr. Rebecca Chen, no relation to Sarah, Marcus Webb and David Porter, and promised to check back in a few days. Then I hiked back to where Cade waited. He shifted the moment I was out of the hunter's sight. They know. Not what you are, I said, but they know something unusual is here, and they're not going to leave. Cade's jaw clenched. Then we need to make them leave. Over the next week, we implemented a careful plan. The pack avoided their cameras completely, changing their patrol routes and hunting grounds. I visited the researchers regularly, became friendly with them, and subtly planted seeds of doubt, mentioning that the wolves in this area were probably just a large family group, nothing special, suggesting that their equipment might be malfunctioning in the cold, expressing concern that their presence was pushing the wolves deeper into dangerous territory. It was working. They were starting to question their findings, starting to consider moving their research elsewhere. Then everything went wrong. I was visiting their camp on the 8th day when we heard it. A scream, raw and terrified, coming from the forest. We all froze. That sounded human, Marcus said, already grabbing his gear. We ran toward the sound, crashing through undergrowth and snow. What we found made my stomach drop. Ash, the youngest pack member, was caught in a bear trap. The illegal kind, with teeth designed to hold fast. He was in human form, a young man who looked barely 20, with sandy hair and features twisted in agony. Blood pooled around the trap, stark red against white snow, and he was surrounded by 3 armed men I didn't recognize, their rifles pointed at his chest. "Please," Ash was gasping. "Please, I was just—" "Shut up," one of the men growled. "Told you we'd find one eventually. Fetch a pretty price, he will. Poachers. But not after normal game. They were after shifters." The researchers stopped beside me, shocked into silence. I saw Rebecca's eyes widen as she processed what she was seeing. A naked young man caught in a trap, surrounded by armed criminals, bleeding and terrified. Before anyone could react, I stepped forward into the clearing. "Let him go," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. All 3 poachers turned to look at me. So did Ash, his eyes wide with fear and pain. "Well now," the leader said, grinning, "looks like we got ourselves a bonus." And I realized, with terrible clarity, that I just stepped into something far more dangerous than I'd anticipated. The leader of the poachers was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and bad decisions. Scarred face, dead eyes, the kind of person who'd learned long ago that cruelty was profitable. His rifle shifted slightly, no longer pointed at Ash, but not quite aimed at me either. Calculating. "Emma, run," Ash gasped through his pain. Blood was still seeping from where the trap's teeth bit into his leg. "Please, just—" I said, "Let him go." I kept my voice level, even as my heart threatened to hammer out of my chest. Behind me, I could sense the researchers frozen in shock, trying to process what they were seeing. "That trap is illegal. You're on protected land, and that boy needs medical attention." "Boy?" The leader laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Lady, you have no idea what that is." "I know exactly what he is." The words came out before I could stop them. "And I know that if you don't release him in the next 30 seconds, you're going to regret it." It was a bluff. A desperate, foolish bluff. The pack was at least a mile away, patrolling the northern boundary. Even if they'd heard Ash's scream, they couldn't reach us in time. I was one unarmed woman facing 3 armed criminals, with an injured shifter and 3 confused researchers as collateral damage. But I'd learned something over the past few weeks. Sometimes bravery wasn't about having power. It was about acting like you did until the real thing arrived. The leader's expression shifted to something uglier. 30 seconds, huh? How about I just... A howl cut through the air, not distant. Close. So close I felt it reverberate in my chest. Then another. And another. Until the forest around us seemed alive with the sound. A chorus of fury and promise that made even the poachers' faces pale. "What the hell?" one of them started. The pack burst from the tree line like a dark wave. 12 wolves, moving with terrifying coordination. Their eyes reflecting the afternoon light, they formed a loose circle around the clearing, trapping the poachers, the researchers, Ash and me inside a ring of predatory intent. And leading them, massive and magnificent and absolutely terrifying, was Cade. His lips were pulled back from his teeth, a growl rumbling from his chest that I felt in my bones. The other wolves echoed him, a sound that spoke of ancient fury and imminent violence. The poacher's rifles swung wildly, trying to track too many targets at once. "Don't shoot!" Rebecca's voice cracked with panic. "For God's sake, don't shoot them!" But the leader wasn't listening, his rifle centered on Cade, finger tightening on the trigger. I moved without thinking, threw myself forward, positioning my body between the gun and the wolf. "No!" The world seemed to slow down. I saw the shock in the poacher's eyes, saw Cade's golden gaze widen, heard Riley's snarl of denial. The rifle fired. Pain exploded in my shoulder, white-hot and all-consuming. I fell backward into snow that suddenly felt warm. Strange how cold could feel warm when your body was in shock. Above me, the sky was impossibly blue, perfect and unmarred. Then Cade was there, shifting mid-leap, his human form landing beside me. Emma. "Emma! No, you foolish, brave!" His hands were on my shoulder, applying pressure, his face stricken with an anguish that seemed disproportionate to the wound. But I could hear other sounds now. The pack no longer holding back, snarls and screams and the metallic clatter of rifles being torn from hands. The researchers shouting, trying to stop a violence that was already in motion. Ash, still trapped but yelling at the pack to stop, not to kill them, to remember the laws. "Enough!" Cade's voice rang out, Alpha command making it impossible to ignore. "Enough!" The wolves froze. The poachers, 2 of them injured now, 1 unconscious, stopped struggling. Even the researchers went silent. "Riley, free Ash, Finn, secure the weapons." Cade's voice was hard as iron, but his hands on my shoulder remained gentle. "The rest of you perimeter guard, make sure we're not interrupted." The pack moved to obey instantly. Riley shifted to human form, her strong hands working the trap's mechanism until Ash was free. He immediately shifted as well, limping over to where I lay. "I'm so sorry," he was saying, tears streaming down his young face. "Emma, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have been more careful. Not your fault," I managed through gritted teeth. The pain was intensifying now, no longer shocking but building to something unbearable. Trap. Illegal. They were hunting you. "She needs a hospital," Marcus said, finding his voice. He'd pulled out his phone, was staring at the no signal message. "We're too far out. I can't call for help." "We can help her." Riley had appeared beside Cade, dressed now in the clothes she always stashed near pack territory. She assessed my wound with practiced efficiency. Bullet went through. Clean exit. She's lucky. Lucky. I laughed weakly. Right. Cade's expression was terrible to behold. Guilt and fear and rage all mixed together. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" "You're mine," I said simply. "Mine to protect." Something in his eyes broke then. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to mine, careful not to jostle my injury. "You stubborn, impossible woman. You beautiful, brave, absolutely infuriating mate." "Mate?" Rebecca had approached cautiously. "Did you just call her—" She stopped, looking between us, at the wolves still surrounding the clearing, at Ash's freed leg already showing signs of impossible healing. "Oh my God, the stories are true, all of them. You're shifters," Riley said calmly. "Yes, and you've just stumbled into something that was meant to stay hidden, which presents us with a problem." The conscious poachers had been herded together, guarded by 3 massive wolves whose message was clear. Try to run and you won't make it 10 feet. They looked terrified, their bravado completely shattered. "Good. These men," Cade said, his voice cold, "knew what we were. They came here specifically to hunt us. They're part of a larger organization that traffics in supernatural creatures." He looked at the leader, who'd regained consciousness. "You're going to tell me everything. Names, locations, how many others, and then you're going to disappear from these mountains and never return. And if we don't," the leader spat. Cade smiled, all teeth. Then we stopped being civilized about this. The interrogation took an hour. The poachers talked. Fear was an excellent motivator. They gave up names, addresses, information about a trafficking network that made my blood run cold. Shifters weren't the only supernatural creatures they hunted, apparently. There was a whole dark market for beings humans didn't believe existed. By the time they were done, I'd been bandaged with supplies from the researcher's first aid kit and given something for the pain that Riley produced from somewhere. My shoulder throbbed, but the bleeding had stopped. Shifter first aid, apparently, was very effective. What about us? David, the quieter researcher, finally asked. We know now. We've seen everything. Cade looked at them for a long moment. That depends. What do you intend to do with this knowledge? I don't know, Rebecca said honestly. She looked shaken, her scientific worldview clearly shattered. A week ago, I would have said I'd document it, publish, make my career. Now? She looked at Ash, at his leg that was healing before our eyes, at the wolves surrounding us, some of whom had shifted to human form and were now dressed in stashed clothing. At me, cradled carefully in Cade's arms. Now I'm not sure what I believe anymore. Believe this, Riley said, her voice kind but firm. We are not specimens to be studied. We are people who live between two worlds, trying to survive in an age that wants to dissect anything it doesn't understand. If you expose us, you endanger not just this pack, but shifters everywhere. You paint targets on the backs of beings who've lived peacefully alongside humanity for millennia. But the scientific implications, Marcus started, are not worth the cost, Rebecca interrupted. She looked at her colleagues. Some things aren't meant to be shared. Some secrets need to stay secret. Our careers will survive. She turned to Cade. We'll delete our footage, destroy our notes. As far as the world is concerned, we found nothing unusual in these mountains except some wolves with interesting behavioral patterns. Normal wolves, nothing more. Cade studied her, and I could see him weighing her sincerity. Finally, he nodded. Finn will escort you back to your camp. You'll pack up and leave today. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, we'll know, and we'll be far less friendly next time. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The researchers left within 2 hours. Their equipment packed with record speed. The poachers were dealt with more harshly, stripped of their gear, their documentation confiscated, and marched to the southern boundary of pack territory. There, Cade gave them a choice. Never return to Alaska, and never speak of what they'd seen or face the consequences. They chose wisely. As for me, I was carried back to my cabin by Cade, who refused to let me walk, despite my protests that I could manage. You were shot, he growled. You're being carried. It's just my shoulder, I argued. My legs work fine. Emma, if you keep arguing, I will carry you everywhere for a month. I subsided, secretly not minding the way his arms felt around me. Back at my cabin, the pack gathered. All 12 of them, in human form now, crowding into my small living room. I got my first real look at them all. Riley's sharp features and silver hair, Finn's scarred face and kind eyes, young Ash with his nervous energy, and 9 others whose names I was still learning. They were a family, I realized. Not just a pack, but a chosen family bound by more than blood. You saved my life, Ash said quietly. He was sitting on the floor by my chair, his leg fully healed now. You didn't have to. You barely know me. But you put yourself between me and that gun. That's what pack does, I said, echoing Cade's words from weeks ago. We stand together, Riley smiled. Well said. She raised a mug of tea. When had someone made tea? In a toast. To Emma Thorne, who dove into frozen water to save us, who faced armed poachers without hesitation, and who took a bullet meant for our Alpha. I'd say she's earned her place, wouldn't you? The pack erupted in agreement, voices overlapping as they raised their own mugs. Cade, standing behind my chair with his hand resting protectively on my good shoulder, rumbled his approval. Pack, Finn said simply. Pack, the others echoed. And just like that, I belonged. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. My shoulder healed with remarkable speed. Shifter medicine, apparently, worked wonders even on humans. The town noticed my injury, and I spun a story about a fall while checking traps. No one questioned it. Why would they? I was just Emma, accident-prone and forgettable. Except I wasn't anymore. Cade moved more of his belongings into my cabin, claiming it was for protection, but we both knew better. Most nights he slept beside me, sometimes in wolf form curled at the foot of my bed, sometimes in human form with his arms wrapped around me. We were taking things slowly despite the intensity of the bond, learning each other in the quiet moments between pack business. The others visited regularly. Riley taught me to shoot, insisting I needed to be able to defend myself properly. Finn showed me how to maintain equipment and weapons. Ash, grateful and devoted, brought me books he thought I'd like, and told me stories about pack history. I quit my job at the equipment rental. The pack provided for me now, not charity, but the natural exchange of a pack taking care of its own. I started helping with their work instead, using my knowledge of Coldridge and its residents to help them better protect the area. I became their liaison to the human world, the bridge between two societies that didn't know they coexisted. Sarah figured it out, of course. She cornered me at the library one afternoon, about 2 months after the shooting. "You're different," she said without preamble. "Happier, stronger, and you're spending an awful lot of time with people I've never seen in town before." I looked at her, at my only real friend in Coldridge, and made a decision. "Can you keep a secret? A really big one?" Her eyes widened. "Does it involve your mysterious wolves?" "Something like that." I told her everything. Not because I had to, but because she deserved to know, because she'd helped me when I was searching for answers, had believed me when everyone else thought I was crazy, and because I realized the pack could use another human ally. Someone who understood both worlds. Sarah took it better than the researchers had. Then again, she'd been reading her great-grandmother's journals for years. Some part of her had always believed. "So you're basically the werewolf queen now," she said when I finished. "That's amazing." "I'm not," I started to protest, then stopped. Cade called me his mate. The pack deferred to me almost as much as they did to him. I'd earned their respect and their loyalty. "Okay, maybe a little bit," she laughed. "This is the best thing that's ever happened to Coldridge, and nobody knows it. The irony is delicious." Spring came early that year, the snow melting in March instead of April. With it came new challenges, a rogue bear that needed to be relocated, a logging company that wanted to expand into protected territory, the endless work of maintaining the balance between human civilization and wild spaces. But it also brought moments of unexpected beauty. Running with the pack through forests bursting with new growth, my blonde hair streaming behind me as I tried to keep up with beings born to this life. Sitting on my porch with Cade at sunset, watching the mountains turn gold, learning the howl patterns that meant home, danger, joy. One evening in late April, Cade took me to a clearing high in the mountains. The pack was there, all of them, forming a circle under the rising moon. "What's this?" I asked. "A ceremony," Riley said. She was in human form, dressed in clothes that looked almost ceremonial. Leather and fur, marked with symbols I didn't recognize. We wanted to make it official. Cade took my hands, his golden eyes reflecting moonlight. "Emma Thorne, you came into our lives at our darkest moment. You saved us when we were drowning, stood with us against enemies, took a bullet to protect us. You've proven yourself time and again, shown yourself worthy of the bond we share." The others had shifted to wolf form now, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They lifted their muzzles and began to howl, a song that seemed to pull the moon closer, that made the very air shimmer with power. "We are pack," Cade continued, his voice resonant with alpha command. "We are family. We are one. And tonight we claim you fully. Not as a human who helps us, but as one of us. Pack." "I can't shift," I said, confused. "I'm not like you." "You don't need to be." He pressed his forehead to mine in that gesture that had become our most intimate connection. "You're perfect as you are. Human, but pack. Our bridge, our conscience, our heart." Riley stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in leather. She unwrapped it to reveal a necklace, a simple leather cord threaded through a wolf's tooth. carved with intricate symbols. "This belonged to the first human who ever bonded with shifters," she said softly. "Thousands of years old, passed down through generations. It's been waiting for someone worthy to wear it." She placed it around my neck. "Someone exactly like you." The tooth settled against my chest, warm despite having been in the cold air. The moment it touched my skin, I felt something shift. Not in my body, but in my awareness. Suddenly, I could sense the pack in a way I never had before, could feel their emotions, their loyalty, their love. It was overwhelming and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. "What?" I gasped. "The bond, fully realized," Cade said. "You're ours, Emma, completely." The pack's howl rose again, and this time I felt my voice join them. Not as a howl, I was still human, but as something that harmonized with their song, a cry of joy, of belonging, of coming home to something I'd never known I was missing. When the ceremony ended, we stayed in that clearing until dawn. The pack curled around Cade and me in a pile of warmth and contentment. I drowsed against Cade's chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the pack's presence like a constant embrace. "I love you," I whispered as the sun began to rise. His arms tightened around me. "I've loved you since you pulled me from that water. Since you looked at a dying wolf and saw someone worth saving. You're my mate, Emma, my partner, my equal. I will love you until the day I die, and if there's anything beyond that, I'll love you there too." I tilted my head up to kiss him, slow and sweet and full of promise. Around us, the pack stirred, some shifting to human form to start the trek back down the mountain. "So what now?" I asked. Cade smiled, that fierce, beautiful smile that still made my heart race. "Now we live. We protect what's ours. We face whatever comes together." He stood, pulling me up with him. "We're pack, Emma. That means forever." I looked at the 11 others, Riley with her sharp grin, Finn with his steady strength, young Ash who'd nearly died and now treated me like a sister, and all the others who'd become my family. I thought about the invisible girl I'd been, the one who'd trudged through snow expecting nothing, belonging nowhere. She was gone. In her place stood someone different. Someone who'd found her strength by saving others. Someone who'd earned her place not through power, but through courage and compassion. Someone who finally, completely belonged. Forever, I agreed. And as we made our way down the mountain with the rising sun at our backs and the pack surrounding us, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The girl who saved 12 wolves had found her home, and she was never going to be invisible again.